Good evening, everyone. It is a great joy to see all of us gathered here and looking forward, by God's grace, and also praying that this time would be helpful, encouraging, perhaps even challenging to us as we are thinking through, particularly as the church, how we interact with this subject of witchcraft. So you're most welcome, and we are glad you're here. So thank you, Celian, for the introduction. I just wanted to add just something small to appreciate my wife, Abby, and my daughter, Shiro, and my son, Dayo. They have had to bear with a bit of absence as I have been preparing for this. So I'm very thankful to God for them. So what we shall be looking at today, as you might have seen in the posters, the flyers, and all the ways in which you ended up here, namely that you heard that we were going to be having this pre-conference, you might have seen that the topic we shall be looking at today is the illusion of spiritual control, witchcraft as a perverse worldview empowered by fear. So the topic of witchcraft is an important and fascinating one in Africa. Various people take interest in this topic for different reasons. There are some, perhaps among us, who are afraid of witchcraft because they have been told by a relative that they have been bewitched. There are also some, perhaps not here, but maybe we might know them, who have been ostracized by the community because they have been suspected of witchcraft. But the majority actually take interest, and I suspect that might be most of us, take interest in this subject not because of direct contact with witchcraft, but because of that human curiosity that draws us towards the strange and the secret. That part of us that has endless questions concerning the world of spirits and other such forces. Well, regardless of one's reasons for taking interest in this subject, it is one that confuses and confounds many of us. But the confusion surrounding witchcraft does not mitigate its impact on the real world. And this perhaps becomes most apparent in the challenge that international lawyers have faced when trying to craft international legislation as people seek refugee status as those who are either trying to escape witchcraft or trying to save their lives after being suspected of witchcraft. Right? How do you deal with such cases? So in this paper, we shall be seeking to deepen our understanding of this pertinent cultural phenomenon, and most importantly, to give a biblical evaluation and response, which will hopefully set African Christians on better footing in our task of teaching and preaching truth whenever we are confronted with witchcraft. However, before we embark on this journey, it is crucial that we define important terms in order to avoid any confusion. The title of this paper describes witchcraft as a perverse worldview empowered by fear. So first, in our usage, the term witchcraft refers to conscious acts of either curing or protecting or even poisoning or hurting someone by the use of magic techniques, often with an attribution to spiritual powers. Right? So either protection or curing, or even poisoning and hurting, using magical techniques, often with attribution to spiritual powers. We believe that, broadly speaking, this definition captures the broad spectrum of phenomena witnessed in various African cultures. Secondly, by worldview, we mean the conceptual lens through which we see, understand, and interpret the world and our place within it. And this, of course, implies that witchcraft is not merely a set of practices, but that these practices are based upon and they support an actual understanding of the world, which determines the thoughts, the interpretations, the words, and behaviors of people and of whole communities. Thus, it is important for you to keep this distinction in mind because it will be significant in our analysis of witchcraft. That is the distinction between witchcraft practices on the one hand and a witchcraft worldview on the other hand. However, before we can make any sort of analysis, it is important to give a few examples so that we get a feel of the phenomena we are talking about when we talk about witchcraft. So below we shall offer a limited assortment. We shall be reading some eyewitness accounts from authors, some of whom believe that witchcraft is real, some of whom, despite seeing these things, still do not believe that witchcraft is real. So some eyewitness accounts of witchcraft. In his 1966 book, Juju in My Life, Englishman James H. Neal documents various occurrences during his stay in Nigeria, which he says forced him to resort to witchcraft for protection. So one such occurrence was that of a tree. They were trying to build a development, but in this parcel of land, there was a tree that they could not cut down, even with the strongest excavators. And then he was encouraged and advised by some locals and told that they need to get a witch doctor. So this witch doctor comes, does some magic rites, pleads with the spirit that lived in the tree, and then after that, the locals came with simple machetes and they cut it down. So he says that things like that led him to seek protection from witches. And he also documents an episode where a magical snake was sent to attack him. And it stopped precisely where a local witch had buried some of his medicine for Neil's protection. Elsewhere in Africa, the Cameroonian author Mbunwe Samba, who personally still doesn't believe in the reality of witchcraft, recounts having witnessed the use of a massive python to treat complex fractures after the patient had been warned not to panic. So he thus recounts that upon entry into the house, the snake would lick the area of the fracture, then wrap itself around the place, thus arranging the pieces of bones back in place and disappearing after some minutes. And he says, my cousin was cured by the man in 1955, and thousands of people have received treatment from him. And much closer home, the late John S. Mbiti acknowledged the occurrence of mysterious phenomena that seem to defy even immediate scientific explanations. He specifically recalls a locust invasion during his childhood, which decimated all the food in people's farms except one farm, where the owner had buried anti-locust medicine. This event particularly struck him because all the farms surrounding this farm had been essentially leveled by the swarms of locusts. Yet that particular farm was completely untouched. And as Kenyans, there have also been several news reports over the past few years that capture some of what we mean when we speak of witchcraft. So let us watch two news clips here and see that even on our news stations, this is something that as a society we have come across. So please, let's watch together.
In a rather bizarre case, a man has caused quite a buzz at Karatina town in Nyeri County after he was caught eating grass like a cow with allegations that a spell had been cast on him. The young man, who was spotted chewing mouthfuls of grass, has supposedly been at it for the last 3 days. Upon interrogation, the man, who was incoherent for the most part, told KTN he did not know what happened to him, saying he just found himself eating grass. Residents of Karatina alleged that a spell had been cast on whoever had stolen some goat, and this man is now a suspect according to the witnesses of the grass-eating saga.
Aliimba busi, lakini sijui kama ni kweli, lakini mimi nimempatia nyasi na akakula. Anasema ati mahali alikuwa amelala, alafu akaamuka, akitangulia aliona akikula nyasi.
Vile inaweza saidiwa ni kama iko watu wa kumuchika arudishwe kwao, ndio hiyo mambo wasungumuze, watengeneze hiyo mambo. Wakisha kumaliza hiyo mambo kutengeneza, pengine yule mtu alifanya hiyo madhambi anaweza sema apatiwe kitu, na akipatiwa kitu atamtengeneza naye mzuri.
Kwa sababu watu wamezoea mambo mabaya hapa Karatina, wamezoea kuibaiba watu, hata kama unatembea kwa barabara waonecho mambo kama hii.
In our second clip, please disregard, there's a lady who keeps making tribalistic comments, so please disregard that. And then let's watch it.
Jina ni nani? Kwa sasa jina ni kuu.
Baraka. Baraka Joseph.
Makosa ni nini? Ulifanya nini?
Ni mbuzi kabisa. Mbuzi mbili na kuku mbili.
Ulikuja Mombasa lini?
Sasa Wakamba mbona wako hivi lakini?
Wewe ni kabila gani? Nyumbani ni wapi?
Wakamba mbona wako hivi lakini?
Nyumbani?
Amesema nyumbani Nairobi, mzaliwa Nairobi.
Wakamba mbona wako hivi lakini?
Uliba wapi?
Na mbuzi iko wapi baba tuwarudishie?
Abande sasa mpe karatasi aandike ndio tumuelewe. Ameandika?
Ameiba ya Mkamba.
Aliba mbuzi mbili na nini?
Mbili na kuku mbili. Nairobi.
Baba.
Na hii mganga anaitwa nani alifanya hii maneno na wewe si
kabila gani? Wewe ni Mjaluo wapi? Mjaluo wapi huyu na mtumia huyu kijana? Leta nimsaidie.
Kumbe hivi vitu zinakuanga ukweli?
Ukweli?
Mjaluo wapi?
Ni ukweli. Nyumbani wapi Nairobi?
Unamea nini zinakuja kwa kichwa na zamani ni ukweli.
Wewe ni Mjaluo.
Nataka nijue hiyo mtu amefanya maneno nimtembelee hata mimi.
Huyo au rafiki yako?
Huyu ndamuona kabisa.
Mjaluo wewe. Sasa
Andika.
Nairobi.
Wewe ni mtu wa wapi? Nairobi.
Nairobi.
Sasa
Right. So if you had the last comments, the officer saying, I want to know who did this so that I may go and pay a visit as well. So even though various authors explain the phenomena of witchcraft differently, no one can debate the fact that there exists some phenomena that requires explanation. So the question then is, how do we make sense of these things? And as we begin our investigation, we want to listen to the various ways people have described witchcraft, before then turning to the Bible and seeing how it describes witchcraft. So on the one side, it is safe to conclude that many Africans who live within the sphere of such occurrences believe in the power of witchcraft. Many African authors have documented their encounters with these strange incidents and cautioned readers against them. In fact, many of us Africans, perhaps even seated here, walk around with a secret fear that you might at some point end up getting bewitched. And this, unfortunately, is true even among genuine believers. And unfortunately, some of us actually know of people who actively consult witches for solutions to various life problems. Thus, for many Africans, there is both an acknowledgement of witchcraft practices and also an embrace of the witchcraft worldview, which we shall describe in detail later. However, unlike the majority of Africans, not everyone is agreed on the reality of witchcraft. There are those who completely reject any reality behind both witchcraft practices and the witchcraft worldview. So we now want to hear from some of these voices, as we desire to wrap our minds around witchcraft and how it shows up in various communities. Let us give some attention to the observations made by modern scholars who have studied this phenomenon, namely anthropologists, sociologists, and economists. This will give us an opportunity to hear from people who interpret witchcraft differently from what many of us are used to. And so this section helps us to do exactly that. Modern scholars' descriptions of witchcraft. We begin by looking at the anthropologists' and sociologists' take on witchcraft. Many anthropologists and sociologists approach the question of witchcraft from a materialistic worldview, a worldview that rejects any spiritual or supernatural realities. And so then they treat witchcraft as merely a social phenomenon. While some might disagree with this conclusion, it would certainly be an error to downplay the social significance of the witchcraft worldview in the communities that embrace it. And so in these communities, witchcraft serves an important role both in the individual and social lives of the people. So let's see a few of what these scholars have discovered as they have been busy researching this area. So first and foremost, through careful observation and integration into various communities, anthropologists and sociologists have rightly concluded that witchcraft serves as a tool that gives the community a language for dealing with misfortunes. So these ideas let people blame someone else for bad luck, for death, for injury, really for anything. They provide explanations for mysterious events and explain calamities or even untimely deaths. For example, in some cultures, this runs so deep that an early morning fatigue is often blamed on witches, who are believed to have taken people and used them as farmhands during the night. Yet, though this might make witchcraft sound like an all-encompassing explanation for every bad occurrence in a community, scholars have noted that claims of witchcraft are carefully controlled by the community's outlook on life. This means that, in the community's life, witchcraft is not an all-powerful force hanging over the community, but rather it is one tool in the community's toolbox for handling misfortune. For example, in almost every culture, witchcraft is not used as an excuse to not follow reason or proper procedure in one's undertaking. Rather, as Evans Pritchard explains, witchcraft has its own logic, its own rules of thought, and these do not exclude natural causation. Belief in witchcraft is quite consistent with human responsibility and a rational appreciation of nature. First of all, a man must carry out an activity according to traditional rules of technique. It is only if he fails in spite of adherence to these rules that people will impute his lack of success to witchcraft. In this way, scholars have noted that the community is the one that defines the parameters which misfortune can rightly be attributed to witchcraft. In this respect, again, there are rules and regulations that govern people's claims of witchcraft. For example, among the Azande, you could cite witchcraft as a cause of misfortune, but never as a cause of law-breaking. Right? A thief or an adulterer could never say that they committed the offense because they were bewitched. That no one will buy that. This is also the reason that witchcraft is not cited as the source of misfortune when one is known to have broken any of the community's taboos. In other words, witchcraft is almost always used in ways that firmly align with the community's moral compass. And this is why many modern scholars see this and they say this is too much of a coincidence. But aside from the community's control over what can be rightly termed as witchcraft, these researchers have also observed that people raise witchcraft accusation along sociologically significant lines. In many cultures, suspicions and accusations of witchcraft mainly occur involving one's enemies, or those they think are jealous of their own success. In the majority of cases, suspicions of witchcraft do not go outside the scope of a single homestead. Especially in previous days when a homestead housed several generations of polygamous families. In such close proximity, hatred and rivalry was sure to arise, and witchcraft accusation always occurred along these lines. Thus, these scholars note that witchcraft provides the community with a way of attributing their misfortunes upon their enemies, whom they think would desire their harm. So when these researchers see all of this, they conclude that witchcraft is only a societal construction. Again, we shall engage with these conclusions later. But for now, let us continue digging deeper into what these researchers have found in these various communities. So besides explaining misfortune, another sociological role that witchcraft plays in many cultures is providing an avenue through which to know and safeguard your future endeavors. So witch doctors are consulted when a man desires to marry a wife, or to start a business, or to give his daughter in marriage, and so forth. And when a woman desires to inquire into the future welfare of her home and her family, that's when she goes and sees the witch doctor. But the errand does not merely end with inquiry either. Rather, people take proactive steps to secure themselves from misfortunes. And so in various communities, people purchase good luck charms and wooden carvings and clay figures, beads, stone carvings, etc. for good luck. Therefore, witchcraft provides the community with something human beings innately long for, and that is the desire to know and safeguard our futures. Again, though we might disagree with some of the scholars' conclusions, it is significant to note the psychological role played by witchcraft in these communities. Fourthly, anthropologists and sociologists have realized the power that witchcraft has in controlling the morality of the community. In many cultures that believe in witchcraft, these scholars have noted that witchcraft provides an alternative system of justice. In some communities, the very threat of witchcraft is effective in curbing antisocial and harmful behavior that might otherwise have been committed. It even serves as an important motivator for people to undo wrongdoing. For example, in some communities, the threat of witchcraft is enough to cause a thief to return what has been stolen before they suffer the consequences. In other communities, the threat of witchcraft forms the foundation for training children in good behavior. Don't steal, or you will be cursed. So in this regard, it is significant that both the news clips we watched involved retribution against a thief. Right? Thus, when sociologists observe the significance of witchcraft in the worldview of these people groups, they conclude that it is a social construction meant to make sense of the world and to give it a form of control and morality that might otherwise be lacking. Last but not least, anthropologists and sociologists have observed the violence of witch killing in various communities. Here, in this instance, in various communities, certain people are targeted for execution under the accusation of witchcraft. But the interesting thing is the demographic that is targeted. Usually, witch killings overwhelmingly target the elderly, and especially old women, many of whom are widows. This observation has therefore led anthropologists and sociologists to suggest the scapegoat theory, namely, that during difficult seasons, the community reacts by blaming their misfortunes on those who contribute the least to its productivity. Just as various people groups around the world have been known to engage in activity that hastens the death of the elderly, including food being withdrawn, abandonment, or even murder. And thus, judging by the profile of suspected witches and the fact that their assailants are almost always close kin, these scholars have concluded that witchcraft serves as a veil to legitimize the murder, especially of all elderly women, during times of crisis, as a community's way of reducing the mouths it needs to feed. Again, we shall engage some of these conclusions a little later. But it is not only anthropologists and sociologists that have studied witchcraft. Economists have also taken interest in the subject. And they also have raised a few interesting points that would be good for us to note. So we move then to the economist's take on witchcraft. In his influential 2005 journal article titled "Poverty and Witch Killing," economist Edward Miguel conducted an 11-year-long study across 67 villages in western Tanzania, where the controversial phenomenon of witch killing occurred in alarming numbers. While his area of focus was in Tanzania, he also worked in some villages in Kenya, which makes his findings particularly relevant to us. So in this study, Miguel augmented the scapegoat theory mentioned above with his own theory, which he titled income shock theory. So essentially what he was wanting to do is seeing, do witch killings rise and do they increase when any sort of affliction in the community arises? That was the question he was asking. So in his research, he tracked two variables that are known to be linked to witches in the cultures under study: disease outbreaks and extreme rainfall, that is either droughts or floods. So in these communities, both these adversities affect the well-being of the community. And both these adversities are linked to things that witches are thought to be in control of. Right? Both these factors are things that when they happen in the village, people would be quick to say this is witchcraft. And so his question was, do both of these variables give rise and increase witch killings? However, in such agrarian villages, only extreme rainfall, that is either droughts or floods, directly affect the income of the community on a large scale. Thus, it is significant that consistently over that 11-year period, disease epidemics did not increase witch murders, but there were twice as many witch murders in years of extreme rainfall as in other years. Therefore, the economic motivation behind the killing of witches is not hard to discern, when only the shock that leads to a drop in income, which is extreme rainfall, results in more witch murders, while disease epidemics affect neither income nor witch murders. In other words, witch killings do not increase on account of hardships per se, but they appear to be specifically connected to economic hardships. And this observation is further strengthened by the fact that non-witch murders, right, that just common murders of random people, do not increase in those years of extreme rainfall. And so that removes any possible explanation that it was a drop in security in those areas. And so given the large amounts of evidence he presents, it is difficult to disagree with Miguel when he asserts that income shocks are a key underlying cause of the murder of elderly women as witches. Extreme rainfall leads to a large income drop and a doubling of witch murders. This is an important observation concerning the link between witch killing and a community's hardest income shocks. However, many economists then proceed from this observation to argue that witchcraft is therefore merely a social mechanism to eliminate its financial non-contributors. Again, we shall engage these conclusions below. Nevertheless, aside even from the evidence that we have heard that communities are likely to target their least economically productive members during their hardest economic times, it is also a well-established fact that in communities where it is widely accepted, witchcraft functions as an unabashed economic activity. One local put it this way: people use witchcraft as a diagnosis because it is profitable. They are selling their own protection business. They want to sell you protection against witchcraft, so they tell you witchcraft is your problem and that their medicines can help you. In many instances, those who practice witchcraft offer both offensive and defensive services. So for some money, they can be approached to place a curse on a person. And for some money, they can be approached to remove a curse that has been placed on a person. It can be a lucrative business to sell this effective secret knowledge. And many have made a living from it. Indeed, a good number of people spend large amounts of their wealth to obtain access to this power. Thus, the link between witchcraft and money is not one that can be quickly overlooked. Additionally, besides the money that people voluntarily bring to witch doctors, in places where witchcraft is widely accepted and feared, witches are known to make use of this fear to extort money from people. They do this either by threatening that they will curse you, or by informing you that you've already been cursed and that they can provide the cure. So at this point, I would again like to ask you to turn your attention to the screen, where we shall see a case where a witch doctor extorts money from members of the community using the fear of witchcraft.
It is not rare to have one excommunicated from society on suspicion of dabbling in witchcraft in some parts of Kenya, but not so for a society and a people where witchcraft is deep-seated. A picture that becomes clearer in the small village of Yemboni, in the heart of Makueni, in this hot and punishing climate, dotted by desiccated trees and shrubs. Residents here pondering over a web of events that have left most of them anxious, to say the least, and especially at the mention of one name that most of them here only speak of in hushed tones. Mulika, a witch doctor from Tanzania who they say is to blame for their wars, a man who supposedly all too willingly dishes out his services to a not-so-willing people, forcing his way into their homes for cleansing ceremonies and thereafter demanding 700 shillings as payment. Paul Ndete claims to have fallen victim.
Waliingia nyumbani kwangu at bedroom, wakamwaka pitu huko, wakachapuka kila kitu kwa compound, kila mahali. Nikasikia ati walikuwa wamechimba shimo, wakatoa kitu wakasema ni chini, mimi sijui. Walipomaliza walianza kundai ati walipana kazi ni lazima walipwe. Na mimi nikasema mimi si yapatiwa kazi sababu si kuitana na.
His refusal to pay has isolated him from the rest of the village, even his relatives who have been warned of stern consequences by the witch doctor should they have any associations with him.
Isipokuwa wale wako hapa nyumbani ndio tunaongea tu. Wale wa relatives ambao wako elia hatuwezi tukaongea sababu wakiongea na mimi ama wakija hapa nyumbani hawatakiwi kuingia kwangu hata hapa nyumbani. Kwa hivyo hata mkikaa hapa siku ngapi hamtapata mtu kwa kuingia hapa.
The warnings have also stopped the flow of customers to his shop, which now remains under lock and key, with the items for sale left to gather dust.
Niko na pipi na niko na watoto na niko na mama yangu na wote wanategemea hiyo. Kwa hivyo kwa sasa hata kuna shida nyingi kwa sababu ni kazi imefungwa na hao watu wanataka kula na wana ale mahitaji yote ya binadamu.
A story that Penina Kioko, yet another of his victims, can relate to.
Alikuja anapita mara moja, hakuzungumza na mimi. Aliingia kwa nyumba na mimi nikaingia kwa sababu nilisikia mtu mmoja akiniambia wakiingia kwa nyumba wanachukua vitu.
She too has been isolated from the community, as residents here not only live in fear of what might befall them should they defy the witch doctor's demands, but regard them as outsiders. They say that they have reported to the authorities, but not much has been forthcoming.
Kama iko kuvunja sheria, tunaingilia. Kama mtu anaripoti fulani amenifanya hivi, ameguya kwangu without my consent, sisi kama serikali tunaingilia na tuna arrest hiyo mtu na tunampeleka kotini. Na hakuna umoja sova amewahi kulalamika nimefanya hivi na hivi, ni hiyo daktari.
In an area where belief in witchcraft thrives, the verdict is swift and the sentence brutal, that not even the administration can tamper with free will.
Wiko wale wanataka mtu anaitwa Muleka na iko wale wataki.
And that such is the agony of a community struggling to break free from deep traditions, having to contend with the fact that witchcraft will perhaps be there to stay. Sheila Sendeo, Citizen Weekend.
Thank you. So you see some of the effects that a deep belief of witchcraft can have. It can be used as a tool for extortion. And so as a result of all that we have seen, economists have seen that there is an inextricable link between a community's witchcraft beliefs and their economic lives. Indeed, there is a very real way in which witchcraft is an economic activity. So therefore, we see that modern scholars have been able to pinpoint with great clarity the anthropological, the sociological, and the economic role that witchcraft plays in the societies that accept it. However, because many of them work from a materialistic worldview, believing that the visible world is all there is, and that there is no such thing as spirits or the supernatural, then they use these findings to completely hollow out witchcraft practices of any potential power. And this concludes our exploration of the findings of modern scholars who utterly reject any reality behind witchcraft. And so here we see two main perspectives arising on witchcraft. As Mbiti writes, the discussion of witchcraft is centered on two camps at opposite ends. The larger camps belittles and despises the whole concept of mystical power. The other is represented by a few scholars who seriously consider African views, fears, uses, and manipulation of this power. Or in other words, to make use of categories that we had introduced earlier, on the one hand, there are those who see a reality in both witchcraft practices and the witchcraft worldview, and many Africans fall there. While on the other hand, there are those who deny any reality behind both the witchcraft worldview and witchcraft practices. So at this point, having considered people's views on witchcraft, it is important for us to decide which view we must take. But in order to do this, the all-important question for us becomes, what does the Bible say? How does the Bible portray witchcraft? Let us now switch gears and answer this very important question: the biblical portrayal of witchcraft. So the first thing to be said here is that the Bible absolutely acknowledges that there is a power behind witchcraft practices. For example, when Moses was before Pharaoh in Exodus 7 and 8, the Bible makes it very clear that there was a kind of power in the magical practices of the Egyptians. They were able to duplicate the miraculous signs that God worked through Moses and Aaron. When Moses instructed Aaron to cast down his staff so that it became a snake, Exodus 17:11 tells us that the magicians of Egypt also did the same by their secret arts. When Moses instructed Aaron to stretch out his staff-carrying hand and turn all the water in Egypt into blood, Exodus 7:22 says that the magicians of Egypt did the same by their secret arts. And when Moses instructed Aaron to stretch out his staff-carrying hand in order to make frogs come up onto the land of Egypt, Exodus 8:7 announces that the magicians did the same by their secret arts and made frogs come up on the land of Egypt. Therefore, the Bible categorically rejects the interpretation of witchcraft that sees it as nothing more than an anthropological, sociological, and economic reality. Indeed, contrary to what some have claimed, Christianity is not incompatible with an affirmation of the dark power that lies behind witchcraft practices. The Bible presents a real devil with real demons and makes it clear that some people have honed the ability to amaze people with this dark power. See, for example, Simon the magician in Acts chapter 8, verse 9. In Ezekiel 13:18, Yahweh utters judgment on, quote, the women who sew magic bands upon all wrists and make veils for the heads of persons of every stature in the hunt for souls. It appears that these women were selling these wristbands and veils as magical paraphernalia, intended to protect their wearers. So God denounces this as hunting for souls, as they attempt to turn these people from worshiping God to the witchcraft worldview on account of the perceived efficacy of these witchcraft practices. Indeed, in Acts 19:19, one of the signs of conversion at Ephesus was that, quote, a number of those who had practiced magic arts before brought their books together and burned them in the sight of all. Therefore, the Bible certainly acknowledges the reality behind witchcraft practices. There is a satanic power behind these rituals. However, the Bible also completely rubbishes the witchcraft worldview. And we have not yet defined it in detail, but we will do later, this witchcraft worldview. But the Bible rubbishes it because it views the world, it's a view of the world that holds witchcraft as their ultimate spiritual power and calls people to place their trust in it. The Bible does this. The Bible undermines the witchcraft worldview by making it clear that the power behind magical practices is not an equal and opposite power to that of God. For example, even though the Egyptian magicians were able to replicate the sign of turning a staff into snakes, Aaron's staff swallowed up their staffs. Exodus 7:12. Also, even though Pharaoh's magicians could copy the plague by turning water into blood and bringing frogs onto the land, they could not undo the plague that God had brought. And therefore, in Exodus 8:8, Pharaoh has to beg Moses, plead with Yahweh to take away the frogs from me and from my people, and I will let the people go to sacrifice to Yahweh. And ultimately, beyond the first two plagues, the magicians were completely unable even to copy the signs that God performed through Moses and Aaron. On the third plague, with the coming of the nuts, the magicians tried by their secret arts to produce nuts, but they could not. Then the magicians said to Pharaoh, this is the finger of God. Exodus 8:18-19. And beyond this point in the narrative, the magicians disappear completely. The only other time they are mentioned is in Exodus 9:11, where we see them suffering together with the rest of the Egyptians. It says, and the magicians could not stand before Moses because of the boils, for the boils came upon the magicians and upon all the Egyptians. The rest, as they say, is history. God won and freed his people from Egypt. The magicians offered an illusion of spiritual power, but before God, they were ultimately useless and helpless. The same thing is seen in Ezekiel as God promises judgment over the witches and decrees freedom for their captives. He says, behold, I am against your magic bands with which you hunt the souls like birds, and I will tear them from your arms, and I will let the souls whom you hunt go free. You shall no more see false visions, nor practice divination. I will deliver my people out of your hand, and you shall know that I am Yahweh. Ezekiel 13:20-23. In the book of Acts, as we have seen, the triumph of the gospel over witchcraft is clear. We see this, first of all, in the casting of Simon the magician in Acts 8:20-23, and the conversion of former magicians in Ephesus in Acts 19:18-19. Therefore, the Bible acknowledges the dark reality behind witchcraft practices, but it rejects the plausibility of believing in witchcraft as a life-informing worldview. Furthermore, the Bible does reveal some interesting details concerning witchcraft that anticipate the findings of modern scholars. For instance, the picture of Egypt presented in the Exodus narrative reveals the anthropological, sociological, and even economic functions of witchcraft at play. The state had magicians who were employed to offer spiritual protection to Pharaoh. Notice the presentation of witchcraft as an economic activity. Sociologically, this would have served to keep the citizens subservient, as they would not have risked being bewitched or cursed. Communally, magic was used as a safeguard for the Egyptians against external attacks. And that's why you see in the narrative that the ultimate line of defense against Yahweh's claims and demands that they let the people go is the magicians. And once the magicians are conquered, then Egypt is free to be plundered. This was their state function. In fact, for Pharaoh as an individual, the magicians served a very important psychological relief from anxiety. We see this in the life of the Pharaoh of Joseph's day, and also in Nebuchadnezzar in the book of Daniel, who sought psychological reprieve from his magicians after having a troubling dream by commanding them to offer its interpretation. Genesis 41:8. And if you look at Daniel 2:5-8, Nebuchadnezzar commands his magicians to tell him both the dream and its interpretation, so that he can know they're not lying. But it is especially the economic link that the Bible makes repeatedly explicit. For example, it is easy to see the financial benefits that the magicians secured for the Egyptians. As the Exodus narrative indicates, Egypt's ability to hold slaves was not ultimately predicated on Pharaoh's military might only, but also on the spiritual powers that the magicians provided. In Ezekiel, the female witches who were making those bands and those veils are said by Yahweh to, quote, have profaned me among my people for handfuls of barley and for pieces of bread. Ezekiel 13:19. In the book of Acts, magic definitely gave a lot of social prestige to Simon, when, quote, all paid attention to him, from the least to the greatest, saying, this man is the power of God that is called great, because for a long time he had amazed them with his magic. Acts 8:10-11. So given the already established link between magic and money, it is not a stretch for us to surmise that for Simon, the offer to buy the Holy Spirit's power was a business investment. It was starting capital, so that he can get this larger power with which to amaze the people even more. And then we assume ostensibly to be paid by them for that same power. But while this link is implicit in Acts chapter 8, Luke makes it explicit in Acts 19. When the converted Ephesians burnt their books of magic and, quote, they counted the value of them and found it to come to 50,000 pieces of silver. This was a lucrative business. This economic link is further strengthened by the observations that the following narrative in Acts 19:21-41 highlights the riot caused by Demetrius and the silversmith and the rest of the craftsmen who were economically dependent upon the worship of the goddess Artemis, and who earned a lavish living from it. Thus, Luke uses finances to highlight the greatness of the work of salvation. On the one hand, those who believed in the gospel burned books of witchcraft and magic worth up to 50,000 pieces of silver. But on the other hand, those who did not believe chose their false gods in order to preserve their financial interests. In this contrast, the link between the practice of magical acts and the gaining of wealth is explicit. Therefore, while the Bible acknowledges a true but limited satanic power behind witchcraft practices, it also reveals the anthropological, the sociological, and economic realities that attach themselves to the witchcraft worldview. And so it appears to us that in order for you to give a robustly biblical critique of witchcraft, you must pay attention to both aspects. Thus, we neither fully agree with majority of Africans who acknowledge both witchcraft practices and the worldview built around them, nor do we also go to the other extreme and completely rubbish all witchcraft and claim that there is absolutely no power behind those practices. Instead, we affirm that there is a dark power behind the practices, but that people proceed from such practices to construct a false and unbiblical view of the world. And so in order to offer a satisfactory response to witchcraft, it is then necessary for us to actually ask ourselves, what is the witchcraft worldview? What sort of view of the world does witchcraft promise or give to those who believe in it? And it is to this that we now turn our attention. Understanding the witchcraft worldview. As a worldview, witchcraft can be broken down and understood in light of J.H. Bavinck's 5 magnetic points of the universal religious consciousness. I know, it's a lot. Let me break it down. Basically, these are 5 essential elements that any worldview, and indeed any religion, must answer as a way to orient its people to the world and their place in it. These 5 magnetic points touch on, 1, the relationship between a person and the cosmos. Right? What is our place in this great big world? Secondly, a person and the moral norm. The sense that there is a code according to which we must live. Thirdly, a person and the tension between action and fate. Am I ultimately active or passive in the outcome of my life? Fourthly, a person and the need for deliverance. Something is broken and it must be fixed. And fifth, a person's relationship to a higher power. Does such a higher power exist? Who is he or she or it? How do I relate to him or her or it? These are questions that every worldview must answer. And as you could have guessed it, witchcraft has remained very compelling in Africa because it does offer answers to these questions. This is why even modern education has not been able to dislodge it from the human heart. Because even behind the education, we still have questions about the nature of the world and our place in it. So let's look at these in order. First, on the issue of a person's place in the cosmos, the reason witchcraft has proven compatible with many African traditional religions is because it shares the same basic cosmology, the same basic understanding of the universe as many of these religions. The vast majority of Africans rightly believe in a spirit world. And yet among those religions, the descriptions and the nature of the activity of that spirit world are varied. But there is one constant among them all, and that is this: there are some malevolent spirits that are out to do harm to the living. Many cultures believe in the presence and activity of ancestors, and therefore often seek to honor them in any way they can. Consequently, many believe that some of these ancestors might become troublesome spirits. Some communities believe in other spirits, not connected to ancestors, also that these other spirits also exist and might seek to do a person harm. Therefore, witchcraft presents itself as a way for the living to position themselves rightly in light of the spiritual realm by conducting certain ceremonies which would appease the spirits and therefore secure protection for you. In such a worldview, it quickly becomes apparent that these same spirits can also be adapted for one's purposes when they desire to harm someone else. So thus, as a worldview, witchcraft offers a gateway through which the human being can position themselves in right relationship to the menacing and intimidating spiritual world, and even appropriate help in dealing with their enemies. This obviously makes witchcraft very alluring. And if anyone would challenge witchcraft, they must reckon with these realities. Secondly, witchcraft presents various norms by which people must live. In the witchcraft worldview, certain demands are placed upon people regarding the way they are to conduct themselves. For example, in some cultures, one must never whistle at night, lest they attract misfortune. And we all know that you never play around with a black cat. So these and other such rules form a set of teachings that people must obey in order to avoid spiritual harm and misfortune. Furthermore, aside from having its own moral system, witchcraft presents itself as a criminal justice system. Witchcraft is used in punishing offenders. As seen in the Kenyan news reports we have just seen, where if you steal a goat, you eat grass. Right? And one anthropologist has therefore noted that witchcraft provides an alternative system of justice. So this combination of law and its enforcement force a very formidable basis for why many people embrace the witchcraft worldview. Thus, anyone who would seek to debunk witchcraft must reckon with these realities. So at this point, again, I would invite you to turn your attention to the screen and see a perfect example of this. People who see this and are tired of being stolen from would be very quickly lured towards the witchcraft worldview.
Residents of Tala in Ukambani woke up to a shocking spectacle after two suspected thieves, Mutinda Mumo and Pius Kioko, turned themselves in while presenting rare symptoms, inflated bellies. The two were in the area to seek the help of a traditional herbalist. It is believed that their stomachs began to protrude after they were allegedly punished for stealing from their neighbors. 18-year-old Mutinda Mumo is alleged to have stolen a Nokia 3310 phone in Machakos, while 35-year-old Pius Kioko is alleged to have been involved in violent crimes of robbery in the area.
Nilichukua simu yenyewe kwa sababu ya vitu hizi ziko humu duniani.
Nimeimbia mtu 2,000, nimevunja nyumba ya mtu mwingine, nimeimba 2,222. na mwingine simu.
The alleged intervention of this well-known herbalist, what is said to have prompted this rare confession, if only so they can be forgiven.
Sitaiba simu yenyewe tena.
Hata mali wenyewe?
Hapana, sitashika.
Mimi huwa sidhurumu watu, lakini mimi huwa nazuia mtu ambao anaweza kuenda kwa boma ya mtu akavunja kuingia na nguvu.
It was a spectacle for residents in this small village in Tala, a region that firmly believes in traditions such as witchcraft, a belief that so many cast this as a lesson to others.
Kile mtu anapanda ndicho anapuna. Wacha waone mafuno yao vile ile alipanda.
Witchcraft may be a taboo for most, but for these Tala residents, it may have seemingly solved their problems, at least for now.
Right. So if you would deal with witchcraft, you have to deal with those realities. You have to present a norm and a justice that transcends that which witchcraft offers. So thirdly then, witchcraft as a worldview presents people with a plausible way of coping with the funny sense that we all have, that we are both actors and victims in life. We are both active and passive in the final outcome of our lives. In other words, witchcraft offers a way of dealing with the tension between action and fate. And every worldview must find a way to address this paradox. Some do it by making people completely passive to the power of fate, as did ancient Greece's astrology, which said that the alignment of the stars on the day of your birth basically determined the course of your life. And even in modern horoscopes, right, those columns in the newspaper that tells you that if you were born on this time, today you'll have this kind of day. While on the other side, people make certain worldviews make people completely active and not subject to fate at all, claiming that people are the masters of their destiny and the captains of their souls. As for witchcraft, in its essence, it is an attempt to draw things within our sphere of power, to make them serviceable to us. Within this view, there is something of the certainty that the world is born by divine and spiritual forces. Therefore, it is possible by saying the right word or by performing the right deed to conquer these forces and to make them obey. This is why our title suggests that witchcraft presents an illusion of spiritual control. As J.H. Bavinck notes, within the worldview out of which magic arises, there may be some respect for the mysteriousness of the universe, but in magic itself, the small and puny man tries to conquer the divine by his power and his insight. In fact, Evans Pritchard very insightfully realized that witchcraft functions in the Azande culture and in many African cultures the way scientific self-determination functions for the European, as a tool for control. He therefore writes this to his fellow Europeans. He says, when a misfortune is in the process of befalling a man, as in sickness or is anticipated, our European responses are different from the Azandes. We make every effort to rid ourselves of or elude a misfortune by our knowledge of the objective conditions which cause it. The Zande acts in a like manner, but since in his beliefs the chief cause of any misfortune is witchcraft, he concentrates his attention upon this factor of supreme importance. They and we use rational means for controlling the conditions that produce misfortune, but we conceive of these conditions differently from them. In other words, witchcraft is for many Africans what scientific endeavor is for many Westerners. It is a tool for control. Thus, witchcraft as a worldview presents itself as a formidable force because it offers people the chance to not be mere victims of fate. It calls them to take charge, to grab their destiny by the scruff of its neck, through exercising control over spiritual realities that might otherwise harm or hinder them. So if anyone would destroy witchcraft, they must provide superior answers in this respect as well. Fourthly, witchcraft claims to provide answers to the universal sense that the world is not as it ought to be. Every human being senses that there is something that is not right with the world. Something is out of balance. Things must be made right. Every religion and every worldview must provide answers to these questions if they are to be in any way psychologically satisfying to their proponents. And witchcraft definitely has answers to these questions. So according to witchcraft, what is wrong with the world? You are in danger of evil spirits and human enemies who might be out to get you, and you never know when and how they will strike. And what is the solution? How do you find deliverance? Through witchcraft. Thus, in some ways, witchcraft functions as a circular worldview. You need deliverance and protection from witchcraft, and only witchcraft can save you. So this kind of thinking has led many into the dark and secretive offices of witch doctors, where the rituals are performed and many walk away assured that all is now well with the world. In this regard, as many have observed, witchcraft's staying power in Africa, it is difficult to combat witchcraft as a worldview precisely because it has answers to some of these deepest questions. Fifth and most importantly, every human being wrestles with the questions of a higher power. Is there such a thing as a higher power? Who or what is he or she or it, and how do I relate to him or her or it? For any worldview to establish itself in the living experiences of people, these questions must be answered somehow. And just as we might expect, witchcraft as a worldview has answers to these questions. You see, normally witchcraft functions in religious systems that have a supremely transcendent deity, with mediating spirits between the people and the deity. Many ATRs, African traditional religions, are structured in this exact way. And therefore, in many African religions, those who practice magic and are able to commune with the spirits serve an important role in the religious life of the community. So typically, these specialists are classified in those communities into two: witch doctors and sorcerers. So witch doctors are those who are said to perform, quote, good magic that aids the community, while sorcerers are said to exercise bad magic, which harms people. Needless to say, many of these characters do both. But due to our theological bent, we have largely neglected this distinction. But it is a useful one for us to understand the religious leanings of those who rely on witch doctors and at the same time uphold ATRs. In fact, magic is almost always a component of African traditional religions. So therefore, witch doctors act as mediators, as go-betweens, between the lofty and unapproachable deity and the people. They often perform this role through the aid of various spirits, either those of dead ancestors or those of some other supposedly benevolent spirits. So then in this way, those who hold to a witchcraft worldview not only see the use of magic as potentially helpful, but actually sometimes they think of the use of magic as necessary for communion with their God. And so if anyone would debunk the witchcraft worldview, they must provide superior answers regarding a person's relationship to God and the desperate need that we feel for a mediator to come between us and God. So then consequently, based on our discussion in this section, we see that the witchcraft worldview is a robust system of interconnected beliefs that reinforce each other. These beliefs might be founded upon some real witchcraft practices, but these beliefs they extend beyond those practices and present a certain understanding of the world that is radically at odds with the Christian worldview as it is presented to us in Scripture. So fundamentally, as the keen reader might have sensed, this worldview, as you, the keen listeners, might have sensed, this worldview is propped up on every side by fear. It is fear of the great spiritual unknown. It is fear that our enemies might consult a witch in order to hurt us. It is fear that we are not right and something needs to be done. We need a mediator in the spiritual realm. The witchcraft worldview thrives because it plays on our deepest fears. The other thing that you might realize is that once this fear is deeply established in a community, it offsets, it removes the need for real witchcraft practices, right? So like in the video we watched where the witch doctor was harassing people and extorting them, as long as people are afraid, he doesn't even need to do anything real. In other words, the assumption that misfortunes occur on account of witchcraft actually eliminates people's inclination to question whether there is any real witchcraft that is being carried out. This means that the witchcraft worldview becomes a filter through which people understand the world, removing their ability to question the truthfulness of witchcraft claims. And thus people might claim witchcraft where none exists. For example, we just saw in the news, right, what we were saying, the family members shun someone on account of the threat of witchcraft. Without any real investigation, just the fear is enough. Furthermore, I do not doubt that some real witches have been attacked in the places where witch killing is common, but I am also convinced that there are many who have been attacked unjustly, simply because the community's belief in witchcraft powerfully pushes against the need for any real investigations. This is what a certain author calls the Margaret effect, as he notes the fact that the rumors of witchcraft far exceed real observable cases of phenomena that are not immediately explainable by natural causes. He therefore laments, why should Africa enjoy such a dubious privilege of being a land of witchcraft to such an extent that it would pervade all the activities of its subjects, whereas, in reality, witchcraft crises only affect a minority and does not overturn the pragmatic routines of everyday life. And so he says that in order to complement and to qualify this picture, it is advisable to document all the possible patterns between rumors, innuendos, and empirically observed crises. In other words, the witchcraft worldview greatly exaggerates the reality and presence of witchcraft. Because people expect to see witchcraft in action, then they imagine that everything is somehow connected to it. And this fear keeps the cycle going, since they believe that the only way to be safe is to seek out what is so-called the good and protective magic. Now, this might not be the immediate inclination of many Africans in urban areas and many of us sitting here, but there are still vestiges of this worldview that remain. Otherwise, we would not see advertisements of mganga kutoka Zanzibar or mganga kutoka elsewhere in even the largest African cities. Like even outside this gate, at some points, you will see these posters stuck on the poles. They would not post them if they did not have customers, right? So now, aside from agreeing with this scholar, when he demands for deeper investigation into the claims of witchcraft activity, right, we agree. We agree that the witchcraft worldview greatly exaggerates the reality of witchcraft. But then we must also offer a biblical critique in order to expose the lies inherent in the witchcraft worldview itself. But before doing it, let me give us a 10-minute break, because the analysis we have just done might have felt long, but the solutions we are going to give are going also to be a bit long. So let me give you 10 minutes. Please come back, or actually let's make it 5. Let me give you 5 minutes. Please come back at 5:05, and then we'll pick up from here. Thank you.